Hey everybody, we're going to be talking about miniature games tonight. So these are going to be tabletop miniature games. We're going to talk about whether this is going to be something that you want to look into and as a hobby, what it's all about, and how to get into it. But as you always know, Tabletop Gaming Guild, we're all about the memories and experiences that playing tabletop games with friends and family can create. And a really great way of doing that is playing tabletop miniature games. We have three experts tonight. We have Edward, Chris, and you already know Evan. But we're going to go ahead and let them give a little bit about themselves. And then we're going to get into what miniature games are and go from there. But let's go ahead and start with Edward if you want to give a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for the invite, James, for having me on. As I said, my name's Edward. I am a game enthusiast, history enthusiast, but also a co-host of the Brushes and Bayonets podcast, a show about historical miniature wargaming I co-host with Josh. And we, around once a month, I'll say, talk about different parts of historical miniature wargaming. We can kind of get into what that means later and maybe the overlap that exists with board games, which we do talk a little bit about on the show. But my background is very much straddling these different hobbies. And, while I play board games every week with my friends, my real passion and what I spend most of my hobby time on is on historical miniature games.
Sweet. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Chris Graw. Started with role-playing games and have gradually made my way to tabletop games via painting, actually, with games like Zombicide attracted me into that. I run a small commission painting business, and then also recently I've joined as a member of a small independent war games publishing company called BattleBox Studios, focusing mostly on historicals. And I've been playing war games of every possible genre for about the past 6 or 7 years, and I'm happy to share what I know and my own journey into it and how I think it parallels a lot of people's journeys, starting with one particular company and then branching out in a lot of different directions.
That's awesome. And everyone knows Evan, the master of miniatures. But Evan, go ahead and give a little bit about yourself.
Most of the people that are watching this are familiar with this mug, have seen me, listened to me talk about miniatures multiple times. I've come into the miniature hobby quite a long time ago. Actually, it was a probably atypical jump, I would say, jumping in pretty much with a little bit of BattleTech and jumping into a lot of historicals. I met both these fine gentlemen, Edward and Chris, through Little Wars TV Discord and going to conventions and stuff. I've been on the Brushes and Bayonets podcast. I have gamed and talked many a game, talked Chris out of many ideas, and also probably encouraged too many bad ideas for us to work on independently and or together. So, yeah. I'm excited to talk about this topic and get more people into this kind of hobby.
Yeah. So this is a big subject. So there's a lot to miniature gaming. So we decided to break this into 3 parts, although, I mean, there's a lot more. But we're going to break this into Games Workshop, non-Games Workshop, and historical games. But right before we do this, I just want to get an idea of what the name of what miniature games means to each of these people. So for Edward, when someone says miniature games, what does that mean? Like what is a miniature game?
That's a very big question. I think that we're going to get 3 different definitions. So I think going first, I'll do my best. But, the way I think about it is, as I said before, I still play a lot of tabletop role-playing games. I still play a lot of board games. But to me, where I'm differentiating miniature games is most of the time you are buying kits of miniatures, painting them yourself in some fashion, and then over a table of terrain that you've created or purchased, playing with one or more opponents in some kind of contest of strategy. So there's so many kinds of miniature war games, but most of them are fitting kind of into that mold of almost like a board game, but creating the pieces yourself and doing the research yourself into a historical game or into the lore of a science fiction or fantasy game. And then kind of that extra step of, I would say, investment, I think creates multiple rewards down the line.
All right. How about you, Chris?
So as I briefly mentioned, back in I think it was about 2017, 2018, a bunch of friends of mine's got really down the Kickstarter rabbit hole, especially for CMON. And all of a sudden there was like a million board games with a million miniatures, and they were painting them, and I didn't because I had never done that. I'm like, this like painting thing looks kind of interesting. And here I am 8 years later, and I don't even want to show you all of the miniatures I have in my closet. So I think Edward did a good job talking about what miniatures games, and I'll add, I think miniatures games, as opposed to board games, is kind of this interesting hybrid hobby where it's definitely a hobby of playing games, generally focused around some kind of war or conflict. And you can play, of course, it's called miniatures games, so you're playing with miniatures. But you theoretically could just play with colored blocks and you could use the exact same rules and it wouldn't matter. But the miniatures games, the point is that you're putting some kind of physical representation that it takes on the actual appearance as close as you can usually. It's usually not abstract. It's supposed to be at least somewhat realistic, but of course shrunk down of what soldiers you're fighting with. So instead of moving something around on a board, you're moving an actual little tiny soldier around on the board that you've also probably put a lot of work painting into it, hence the hybrid element of it.
So that brings up an interesting question that I'll just ask real briefly. So other than the painting and the really looking cool terrain, what is the big differentiating thing between like a chip-based board game and miniature games?
So I think there's not a universal answer to this, because there's so many different board games, whether those are more traditional American or Euro style games, or block-based games, or chip-based games. But typically, miniature games are played on a completely open table, and your movement is measured with some kind of measuring system, whether that's some proprietary pre-measured system, like some games like Star Wars Legion, or just a good old-fashioned ruler or tape measure in inches or maybe in centimeters. Whereas with board games, they usually design some sort of movement system where you're either moving through areas or hexes or from point to point. So they're a little more restricted, which on the one hand is good because there's a lot less ambiguity. But on the other hand, using a tape measure for measurement allows a lot just like more freedom in movement, for better or for worse.
I'll just jump into, I think something that really draws me to historical miniature wargaming as a niche of this niche, for example, is if you buy a board game, you're kind of coming in with maybe one or multiple specific scenarios that the board game creator has envisioned. Where if you're buying war game rules and buying war game miniatures, you can use any rules you want with the miniatures, and you can set up any battle you can imagine, either real, or that one that you've kind of created on the spot. And then coming up with all these numerous scenarios, I think really opens up the play space to really unlimited by your imagination. So I think that's a really powerful draw for me as well. But I think all of Chris's points are on the nose on where the tactile differences.
Yeah.
And to plug into that a little bit too, like I'm going to hold something up that Chris and Edward can attest to. This base here, how many different things have you seen playing miniature games be on a base this size? So I think really the ambiguity in between chip base and miniature is a very, very fine line of what that is. Because in the end, a chit or a base can just really represent anything you want it to be.
I have seen people use traditional board games, especially things like Memoir 44 or the Command and Colors games, and just replace the blocks with miniatures. And I've also seen people take miniatures games and replace the miniatures with blocks. And, at what point is there like a giant gray zone between, miniatures games and board games? Is a board game with miniatures still a board game, or is it a miniatures game? Who cares?
Yeah.
But I think we've hit all the important points of miniatures games kind of have those miniatures. You're usually painting them. You're usually, but not always, using a tape measure, so it's a little more free form, and you can kind of do a little bit more whatever you want, like Edward said.
Yeah. And Evan, did you want to add anything? What your definition of miniature games is?
So it's kind of a loaded question. Now I'll answer it more on. It depends on who's asking me.
No,
so,
I'm asking you.
So for somebody that's asking that really doesn't have any idea what miniatures like, so if I say I play miniature games and they have no idea, I'll go with the explanation of I play with toy soldiers. It's the most basic and easiest way to explain it, because explaining, going into the minutiae of it, ooh, gone. But if I'm talking to a lot of people that would have an idea of what it is, I can talk about, it's going to be more of a question of what miniature games are you playing? And then I can talk about weird stuff like this that exists.
Yep. Sad that Australia lost.
So that brings up a question that I'm kind of interested in. This, I know it's going to be very different answers from anybody who asked, but if this gets you in trouble, you don't want to answer, don't have to answer. But it's like, I'm kind of curious, like, where's the balance and the hybrid nature of it? Like, how much time do you spend like preparing versus actually playing?
I'll say for me, the preparing is, time-wise, most of the hobby, but I'm really coming at this. So we're kind of spoiling a little bit where I'm saying we're starting with Games Workshop, which originally brought me into this hobby, but now I spend a lot of my time on the historical miniature side. To me, it's just a great marriage of what I'm reading about in history books that I read for fun, and then the kind of games that I like to play with my friends. The board game, you're kind of mixing them together. So, most of my time, if you're counting, reading about campaigns or reading about battles, reading accounts of soldiers, painting the miniatures, prepping the terrain, thinking about all that stuff. That's, I would say most of my hobby time. I don't think that's going to be true for everyone, but I find a lot of joy in that process building to when the game is played, because I think it makes the game that much more fun when you've kind of assembled all the pieces yourself. So maybe 90-10, or maybe even more from preparing to playing. But I might be an extreme example of that. I'd love to hear what Evan and Chris say.
I'm the same.
Yeah,
so
Nathan,
Good.
Nathan, I think, if we compare this to what I think your typical topic of board games is, right? With board games, you crack open the box, you read the rules once or twice, you're playing, and of course, depending on how many times you play the game, your ratio of play to prepare, and prepare in that case is just opening the box and getting everything ready, is probably pretty high on the play side. 99% play, 1% prepare. Like Edward said, and like I said, it's a hobby, right? You're painting the figures, you're putting them together, you're making the terrain. There's definitely a much higher ratio. How high that ratio is really going to depend on what kind of player you are. I know people who aren't particularly big fans of the painting, and depending on what kind of game you play, you make your one army that you like, and then you play with that army over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and then you don't really need to go back and make another army unless you really wanted to. And then all the way on the other extreme, you have Edward, and I will admit myself, where we spend a significant amount of time preparing, not so much time playing. For me, that's partially because I just really enjoy the painting side of it. I came to this through painting, and I'm like, oh, I can play games with this. Oh, that's cool. But also just a factor of there aren't a lot of people in my area who play historical games, so I only get to play historical games a couple of times a year. I could play other games every week if I wanted, but those aren't the games I like.
So yeah, the real thing about it is it all depends on the type of game you're playing. So like what we're talking about in a little bit, talking about Games Workshop or non-Games Workshop games such as like Bolt Action and stuff like that, which I'll just call like the tournament style games, point system games. That's how you build your army. I would say that breaks down to a 50-50. 50% of basically assembling, putting an army roster together to whatever point value, usually 1,000 or whatever it is. You build it, like Chris said, you paint it, you're done. You play that, you have it, you're set. Historical gamers, I think, even though Edward thinks he's in the minority of that, I think really is 90-10, 80-20. It's honestly that, because when we get into that, I know Chris has said multiple times doing his counts of the Crusades where orders of battles are almost non-existent. Or I've been working on years Fort William Henry scenario that's a what if scenario, and I'm trying to pull an order of battle that technically doesn't exist, but I have to work backwards through writings and dispatches. So all this extra research adds into that 90%. And you spend days and days and days working and building and doing this and painting and all that stuff extra for the 3 hours you get to play with it.
Yeah,
it is all worth it. It's absolutely fun. It is great, but it is a lot of work to go and do all that.
And I think I'll jump in, like Evan said, on the high end, maybe it's 50% preparation, 50% play. Even for the people who, for the most part, play some of the more widely available games like Warhammer, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I find the people who stay in the hobby are the people who, buy some miniatures, paint them, play with them, and they don't just like the playing and barely tolerate the painting or the building. They like everything, maybe not to equal extent, right? They prefer playing to painting or they prefer painting to playing, but they at least like everything enough that they tend to not just buy one army. They might start with one army. They should probably start with one army, but sooner or later, and probably sooner, they'll do a second project just because they want more because they enjoy it. And if they don't enjoy it, they're probably not going to stick around in the hobby. And I don't necessarily blame them if it's just not the hobby for them.
Games.
Yeah.
James.
So I will get into how I'm the worst in a little while, but let's go ahead and jump into Games Workshop right now. So basically, love or hate them, they are the titan of the miniature world. They sell more than anyone else as a company. They make more money than any other miniature company, and they're basically like the Hasbro of miniature games. Hasbro's a titan. They make more than the whole hobby board gaming community combined, and it's about the same thing. They have a huge line of games. They have Warhammer 40K, 30K. They have Age of Sigmar. They have a Lord of the Rings game, which I think is called Middle Earth. Can't remember quite right. They have Old
Middle
World.
Earth Strategy Battle Game.
Is it called Strategy Battle Game?
Yeah,
Terrible
terrible
name.
name.
Okay, that is an awful name for a miniature game. How a multi-billion-dollar company came up with that name, that guy should just be shot.
Hey, they're selling it. That's all that
Anyhow.
matters.
So I'll just start with myself real quick, and then we'll jump into stuff. This is what got me interested into miniature games, other than Evan like waterboarding me into miniature games over time. So I talking about being the worst. I have so much Warhammer 40K. And part of my problem is it has a really depth of lore, which I really enjoy. So I really enjoy reading that. So I actually enjoy probably reading that more than anything else. But I also like orcs. So I have currently right now, I've played 0 games with orcs. And I have 4,900 points worth of them. Almost all assembled.
If you've never played, that's 2.5 armies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
So,
and I have 3D printed stuff I need to deliver to him this weekend.
I'm not even counting.
Sitting over here.
So I'm not counting my Tyranids. There's 2K of Tyranids. And I have 1K of Astra Militarum. Which still doesn't count anything I've been printed for me. We're going to get into that, what I think about purchasing versus printing, maybe at some other time. But either way, I have so much Warhammer. I've played with the Tyranids before, and I loved it. I like the idea of the miniature games. I love painting them up, and I'm really interested in expanding out of. I'm going to stay 40K. I'm still going to do 40K, but I'm also interested in a lot of other systems. And I know a lot of you mentioned that you started with or got into 40K for a little bit, or Warhammer in general for a little bit. So we can talk about that, like what systems you went into. I know a lot about 10th Ed and how to play 10th Ed, but I don't know any of the earlier systems, except for 30K, I think is similar to 6th or 7th Ed.
Yes, I think so.
And 30K is something. I love the stuff.
It's Warhammer's nerdier older brother.
Yeah, I mean, to set up an army in 30K destroys my mind. Literally destroys it. Setting up an army in 40K, you don't have very many choices, so it's good. I mean, you got a lot of choices, but you don't have a lot of choices per unit. They either carry this gun or this. Done. But yeah, so which one of you guys wants to jump into your experiences with Games Workshop? Could be Old World, could be 40K.
I'll start because mine is really short.
Okay.
I have played one game of Age of Sigmar with a friend, and that's it. I really don't have much Games Workshop experience in the gaming itself.
Okay.
so I don't have a lot to weigh in on the gaming. I have some opinions on their existence in the sphere and what they do, but I'll go into that a little bit later. Yeah,
Yeah, we'll
my
definitely get
experience
into that.
is I have a question about 40K lore or Warhammer lore. I usually message Chris because there has been a time that he, forced people to listen to him ramble for multiple hours on end. And but I really don't have too much experience other than really like printing stuff for James, and like he sends me stuff and I'm like, I don't know what that is, but sure, I'll put it in my printer. So that's me.
I think the important thing to mention is if we're talking about like you're interested in getting to the miniatures gaming hobby, James, you mentioned 40K isn't the elephant in the room, it's the titan in the room.
Yeah.
It's the single largest company. It is the Dungeons and Dragons of wargaming. And most people have probably heard of it either through a massive series of books. There's probably hundreds and hundreds of books, probably possibly low thousands at this point. Video games, probably a lot of people our age in their 30s have played, or the 40s have played the Dawn of War RTS game, or Space Marine 2, which just came out this year and was huge. And Henry Cavill's making a TV show with Amazon. And so a lot of people are familiar with Warhammer 40K. And if you're interested in playing, I think the important thing to say about Games Workshop and its systems is I personally kind of break them down into 3 categories based on if you want to play, well, you have to find people to play with because it's such a big part of this hobby that 99.9% of games you're playing against another human, right? There aren't really a lot of solo options in this game. Very few, beginning to grow, but not a lot. So you need to have other people to play with. And because Warhammer games are sold in so many different hobby stores around the country, they're therefore played in a lot of hobby stores around the country. And so you have to think, if this is a hobby where I want to play games, Warhammer is not your only option, but it's kind of the big default. I kind of break Games Workshop into a couple different tiers. Like, what are the Games Workshop games that are played in 95% of hobby stores? And that's going to be Warhammer 40,000, the sci-fi setting, and Age of Sigmar, their fantasy setting. And then you've got the games that you could probably find at like more than 50% of stores, which are probably Kill Team and Warcry, which are like their smaller scale, like, oh, I've got like between 5 and 15 guys. And you'll probably find that at your local hobby store, but it's not 100%. And then they have tons of all these little games, which are a little harder to find and tend to have a smaller, more passionate audience, like Warhammer the Horus Heresy or 30K, Necromunda, which is like a skirmish campaign game, the Old World, which is a fantasy setting, which used to exist, and then they discontinued it and they brought it back, and there's a bunch of others. So most people, of course, are going to look at either Warhammer 40,000 or Age of Sigmar because you can play that almost anywhere. And that's why I think, especially me and Edward, you got me and Edward here to be like, let's talk about Games Workshop. Edward and I don't play Games Workshop games, but we both started with Games Workshop games, and that's what happens with most people, because the miniatures are very high quality, also very expensive. You can buy them everywhere. You can buy them anywhere. You can play with them anywhere, and you'll find out pretty quickly whether or not you like the rules. And some people put up with that, and some people play the game and they hate the rules anyway, which I don't understand. It's a very love-hate relationship. But for someone looking for games, you will find it anywhere.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think going off of that too, just from the perspective of my long and convoluted history with Games Workshop, to Chris's point, when I first went into a hobby store 15 years ago, probably 2009, 2010, and was like, miniature seemed cool, and everyone was playing Warhammer. Everyone was playing Warhammer 5th edition, by the way, for 5 editions back. I ended up going to, I loved and read so many of those Black Library books. I went to 40K tournaments. I was in campaigns. I played what was just Warhammer Fantasy is now the Old World, because they, as Chris said, kind of shook up the lore that they had. I made that decision that the thing that I thought was interesting about miniature games was more about, the history and more about playing rules that I really enjoyed playing, rather than finding the games with the rules I didn't quite enjoy. Games Workshop has a history of every couple of years, for the sake of selling more books and miniatures, changing the rules so that like they've gone through the march of editions. And, I still say if you're interested in science fiction or fantasy gaming, they're the most expensive, but I think the highest quality miniatures you can get at the scale that they produce at, which is 28 millimeters. Just for context, the miniatures come in all different scales, and we can kind of talk about that later, but the most common one that you're going to play where one guy is a little guy is a regular sized person stands at 28 or around 30 millimeters tall. So they still make great miniatures. I think that if you're interested in that science fiction fantasy world, they're still worth pursuing. And if you enjoy the game, there's still definitely a lot of fun to be had there. But I'll say that my experience is really kind of cut off around 10 years ago from playing. So.
Yeah. So I got some things to say about Warhammer. And you guys can critique me or whatever, but I'm new to it. So what I would say, if you get into Warhammer, the biggest thing is you don't need the core book, period. It's free and it's online and you can download it. If you buy the 2-inch thick core rule book, 15 pages of that giant book are rules. The rest is fluff. So in 10th edition, they've streamlined it pretty severely from like the other versions. So 10th edition is like the most tournament ready, I think, version, or at least have been told it's the most tournament ready. And from what I've seen from other ones, a lot of the extra rules and stuff have been eliminated. There's no templates anymore. There's none of that stuff. It's just simply straight into playing the game. And they also simplified a lot of the movement and all that fun stuff. So with Warhammer, you don't need to buy the core rulebook, but you do need to buy codexes. And what a codex is for a single army is all the, well, we'll get into whether it actually is or not, which is my problem. It is all the units that you can use in your army that you pick. So if I pick Space Marines, this is like everything I can use for Space Marines. I pick Orcs. This is everything I can use for Orcs. So if you're going to get into it, don't buy, maybe get a combat patrol if you want, and then buy single pieces. Don't buy any other sets. A lot of times when you get the sets now, they do come with a lot of different units, and you do save money for a lot of the different units. It just, a lot of the units aren't usable for what you want. So you end up spending more money and getting less. So get your combat patrol, get your kill team, get into the hobby if you like it. Pick what you like and get those. They're very expensive miniatures, so getting burned out is probably going to be very easy if you spend too much money real quick and you realize the miniature you just spent 40 hours on or doesn't play very well. It's going to hurt. My problem is quit changing the rules all the time. Holy crap. What the hell? It's not every year. It's like every month you get new updates to the rules. I can't handle it. So I just say, if you get the core rule book, you get your codex, just go with that. Don't care about the never-ending slog of rules changes and codex changes and points changes. The app is free if you only care about having one army on it. Otherwise, you have to pay a subscription and get more. But it has, for your codex, has a code on it, and it'll put it in there, and it'll update for you. But wow. So many changes. I get so overwhelmed with Games Workshop and 40K. And they're starting to do that with 30K now too. So they're coming out with a new edition of 30K, and they're starting to get it onto like continual updates for 30K because it seems like that's starting to become popular. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I do like it. Don't buy the data sheets. They're useless. They become out of date like 1 second after they print them.
James, if I could jump in, I think you made a lot of good points, and I would even recommend if you're someone who's never played a miniatures game and you're like, oh, I played Space Marine 2.
Yeah,
that was a fun game. I like killing space bugs. Let me try this thing out. Like, go to your local hobby store,
Yes.
talk to the owner, talk to someone who's playing a game. 9 times out of 10, someone's gonna be like, you want to play Warhammer?
Mhm.
I will absolutely teach you to play Warhammer with my stuff. they probably have more than one army, or a friend will lend you an army. And like, don't buy anything without trying it out. Someone will teach you, right?
Yeah.
As all of us on this podcast or on this YouTube video can attest to, right? Like, we showed up to voluntarily talk about this thing that we can't shut up about.
Yeah.
So like, someone is going to want to teach you how to play.
Yeah.
And then see if you like it. And of course, also think like, well, do I like dudes in giant space armor, or do I like elves and orcs? And like, so play the fantasy one, or play the sci-fi one, just based on your own personal tastes and preferences, before you buy anything, because it is an expensive hobby, and you want to make sure you like it before you dive too deep into it. And like James said, they do change the rules a lot, but also a lot of people act like this is a very important tournament game for very important people.
Yeah.
Especially when you're starting out, just play to have fun. If
Yeah.
you screw up a rule, or if you're using a rule from 3 months ago, who cares?
No one
Just
cares.
have fun.
Well, some people do, but they shouldn't. Just have
Then
fun.
don't play with
Right.
them.
Yeah, that don't play with them is the answer, Chris.
Yeah.
I would say that's a good general rule for all tabletop gaming, whether it's board games, Magic the Gathering, RPGs. It's like, if you go to any decent local game store, is going to have game nights where you can just go and play and try it out.
Play to have fun. Don't play to win. I don't win. I hardly ever win. So I definitely play for fun. But yeah, I just play to have fun.
And if you're very competitive and you get into that tournament scene, great. And you can be very competitive in that side of the hobby, but not everyone is like that.
Yeah. And like I said, there's a lot of stores sell it, or like what you guys said, a lot of stores sell it. And they also bring in other game workshop games, like whatever that weird Middle Earth one is called. I'll probably eventually play that one. Also,
I'll actually say one last thing. The Middle Earth strategy battle game.
Gosh dang it! Why is that name?
I don't know.
For the convenient acronym MESPGA.
Yeah, MESPGA. I'll just call it Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is not so secretly the best game that Games Workshop makes.
What? Well, now I got it.
Yes, it is. It is the best. It doesn't actually require that many models, especially compared to, say, Warhammer 40,000 Age of Sigmar. You could probably play with, depending on what kind of army you play, between like 30 or 40 total, which I know might sound like a lot, but Warhammer, you could have, 50, 100 more. If you like Lord of the Rings, you won't find it at as many game stores, but if you do, they tend to be some of the nicest players I've personally found. The rules, I personally think, are some of the best. They did just get a new edition, but it is updated far less frequently, so you don't need to worry about the rug being pulled out from underneath you. And there's a much bigger emphasis on narrative play and not a lot of emphasis on competitive play. So I will make a specific shout out to the Lord of the Rings game being, I think, secretly the best game that Game Workshop makes, and therefore one of the more available games that you can play, especially if you like Lord of the Rings. If you hate Lord of the Rings, obviously don't listen
Who
to
hates
this.
Lord of the Rings?
See, and there you go,
George R. R. Martin.
You can't sue us because we are saying nice things about you. So, there is some good stuff.
Go for it. I don't have any money. You get nothing. You get all of Nathan's pens. That's all we got.
What?
Yeah, no, you're getting your pens. All right. So yeah, now I'm really interested in that game. But so transitioning, did anyone want to say anything else about Games Workshop before we transition into non-Games Workshop? So go ahead.
And this will actually work into the segue too. And it's where I have a big problem with the Games Workshop model as a miniature game. It's a great way to get people in the hobby because it's marketed really well. It has a great attraction to it. When you look, you see these huge, fantastic models. You're on YouTube. They have great marketing teams to get people to play and paint. I mean, we've all seen people, painters, painting their warlord titans and all sorts of cool stuff like that. They have done wonders to really put themselves out there and make them so recognized. The problem is when you boil it down, that their games aren't truly just a miniature game. They're a tournament game. And that's why you have constant rule changes, constant monkeying of abilities and changes all the time, because it's not built around let's play this game to play this game. This is a tournament style game that we are buying points for our army. And now that we see that somebody has broken the game in the current system it is, we need to make these tweaks and changes to make it more competitive and change these guys around to counteract this. 3 weeks later, oh crap, we broke something else by making these changes, so we have to fix this in order to keep the tournament style of play to continue.
I think also, sorry, go ahead, Evan.
Oh, and I was gonna say, and that's the problem that you have with some of the Games Workshop games, such as like Warlord games and like Bolt Action, that's built around it's built as a World War II, squad-based infantry game. If you boil it down, and as Edward and Chris can attest to, when you really look at the game, how much of it is actually World War II based combat? It's got a little minutia of it because we're using, weapons that were technically correct, but beyond that, it's not. It's all built around the point play for tournament style.
I think to jump off what Evan said, if I could use a metaphor, Games Workshop games, Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, it's like people who play Call of Duty, and like they play Call of Duty, and that's about it. Whereas there's other people who play like lots of different video games, like there's lots of other miniatures games, and they're more willing to jump between them. But a lot of people who play Warhammer kind of tend to stick to Warhammer, and it changes very often. Again, kind of like Warhammer. I think I'm showing my age by saying Call of Duty. Maybe I should say Fortnite. It's like people who just play Fortnite.
Around. Even Fortnite's old.
They just announced a new one. It's still a big deal.
Old man Chris talking here.
Yeah.
What do the kids play these days? Do the kids still play Minecraft?
So boring.
Yes, they still play Minecraft. I can attest to my children playing Minecraft.
I don't normally pass out while I watch my kids play a video game, but yeah.
Should we get into the non-GW stuff?
Yeah, I have a segue for it, but this is one of the things that I found in my limited knowledge of stuff is Games Workshop games, specifically Warhammer 40K and 30K, are supposedly 28 millimeter. They have scale issues.
Yeah, I think they're official. Well, officially, Games Workshop does not say what scale they are. Unofficially, they are now 32 millimeter. Which, for those of you who are like, "What the heck are we talking about?" That means that from the bottom of the feet to the eye is approximately 32 millimeters. Why is it metric and not imperial? I don't know.
They sort of make up their own scale.
Well, it's British based. That's why. But on top of that, and they get around that being it's not 28 millimeters, it's actually 32 millimeter because they slap on this fancy title, heroic scale.
Either way, even whatever size they say it is, their scaling is really weird for like between the tanks and the infantry and the different factions. It's just all over the place. But what I was going to say, transitioning into non-GW games, is there's a lot of miniature agnostic games that your Warhammer games will work for. And some of them seem almost built to be able to port those over. I forget what the one was called. I was super interested. It's a trench warfare game that I was looking into that I can play my Death Corps miniatures in. And yeah, I have
Trench Crusade is I think the game.
Yeah, that one. That looks really cool.
Up on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And
the other one that I think that is an interesting is one-page rules. I don't know if anyone here's heard of that. That's basically just what if we took the core of 40K, filed the serial numbers off, really streamlined it, really made it easy to get up into, and they have like an online web builder. I'll say I still have a ton of 40K miniatures from my time. I have we'll be here for too long if I start talking about how many 40K miniatures I have. But if I'm going to get together with my friend who wants to play a game these days, I would have no idea where to jump back into 10th edition. As I said, I'm 5 editions behind. So I would be playing one-page rules with them or a couple other games. But one-page rules, I think, is the one that's the easiest to port cleanly out of the forever cycling Games Workshop, I would say, scheme to attempt to balance the game, but also to get you to stay invested and keep buying books.
And
that gets us.
Oh, I was going to say, and my thing about one-page rules is, honestly, if you're curious how close they are, I'm surprised they haven't gotten sued. That's how close they are.
That actually gets us into a topic that I think is completely outside of this video, which is games that don't even have miniatures that come with them. James called them miniature as agnostic, meaning it doesn't matter what miniatures you play with. And there are some, like one-page rules, that definitely are Warhammer with the serial numbers filed off. And there are others. There's a game called Xenos Rampant. It's a science fiction game. It has a fantasy version called Dragon Rampant that isn't specifically for Warhammer miniatures. It's for any sci-fi or fantasy you're playing, but you can play with Warhammer miniatures. So if you try Warhammer and you like the minis and you like the stories and you don't like the rules, there's a whole world of rules out there that you can use that the companies don't make miniatures. And that's like a very deep rabbit hole that if you enjoy this hobby, you will probably sooner or later fall down. But it's almost out. Like, there's too many for us to talk about here because we don't even have enough time to talk about all the companies that do make miniatures.
One thing I would say real quick about one-page rules is they do have multiple different formats, so you can transfer over 40K, you can transfer over 30K, you can transfer over Age of Sigmar. Like, they have all these different ones, and one of the ones I was really interested in was they have a space battle one that sort of reminds me of X-Wing. So I think they saw X-Wing, like, oh, let's port that over. So where you play in 40K and other Games Workshop, I just assume are all going to be in the same area, you have an army and you go, and the opponent has an army and they go. One thing I really like about one-page rules, at least what I've read from, like, the Grim Dark, I think it's called, for the 40K, both sides get to fire back when you're playing. So in Warhammer, if I take out all of Evan's unit, his unit never got to fire at me. But in one-page rules, when I'm reading it, looks like they get to fire back before they die. So I really like that idea.
You know, I'm going to kind of just be plugging historical miniature wargaming the whole night as long as I can. I think that, you know, this is something I've talked about with Chris offline a lot, is that when Games Workshop's able to kind of sit on their laurels a little bit, they have a great IP, they have a lot of books, people are going to come to it, and they're going to play the rules that they basically invented in the 80s and have been trying to streamline down to make more tournament friendly for 40 years now, where a lot of new, young, hungry historical miniature rules writers are trying to think of systems that are more fun to play because they know they have competition and they're trying to take down the titan in the room. And you know, we could talk for the whole podcast just about how there's all these different interesting solutions to what I'll call, to your point, the command and control problem. Like, how do units shoot in order? How are they shooting at each other? How are they reacting to each other? You know, this is something that I think miniature rules writers have really been thinking about in depth for, I would say, 30 years now. I've been thinking of different ways of trying to do it. And I think a lot of them have gotten quite good at coming up with really interesting systems that both, yes, they're closer to history, but also make for more interesting, engaging games than the 40K leaf blower effect, where if you kind of start with the first turn and wipe out a quarter of their army, they're now a quarter worse and got to do nothing.
Yeah. And to get in some of the non-Game Workshop games too, that I was looking up that I thought were really neat and see what you guys think about it. There's one called Moonstone that looks really cool, which is a fantasy game where you're going to be playing in like little squad base. So it's individual characters running around, and they're looking at collecting moonstones, and they can cast spells and have all these different cards that they can play, and they all have different abilities. And I thought that system was pretty unique and neat. And there's just so many things that are like Gaslands. Gaslands looks really cool, where you can play with this post-apocalyptic car race sort of thing with, you know, micro machines that you glue crap onto, and it's now something you can play. Like the barrier to entry in a lot of these non-game Game Workshop games is significantly less. So you just have a problem of finding where the book is for some of them and where to purchase it. But like I said, like Gaslands is, do you have some micro machines? No.
Yeah, James, that's a good point. Once you get outside of the Games Workshop bubble, it gets a little harder to find some of these games. And so I know I have a list of some of the games that you're not going to find them in every hobby store. You might not even find some of these in a majority of hobby stores, but you will find them in stores. You will find them on Amazon. Some of these you might even find in Target. Does Target still have a good selection of board games?
They have a decent selection. So basically, at any point of the year, they probably have like 12 to 14 games, which you would consider in the main board game hobby. They make sure to stack in there. But the majority of their shelves are still the mass market fluff because that's what really sells.
Right. But I know Target sells some of these war games and tend to be the more mass market ones. So when you get into the non-Games Workshop games, if you want to play them, some of the ones that are a little more popular, easier to find, will be at some stores. They kind of fall into like licensed games that have some sort of theme or intellectual property around them, and then non-licensed games. So I know there's games like Mantic makes a lot of games, including some board games. They have a new Halo game, which is actually quite good as a game, and also it is Halo if you like Halo.
Yeah.
Flashpoint, right?
Yes, Flashpoint. There's a company called Atomic Mass Games, which I believe is owned by Fantasy Flight.
Yes.
No.
It is owned by No, it's owned by
Asmodee.
Yeah.
Not Fantasy Flight.
Which also owns Fantasy Flight?
Yes.
I think they split off.
Okay.
There's a story there.
All right,
Yeah.
but Atomic, they make one of my favorite. Shatterpoint is a great game.
Yes. Yeah, they make Star Wars Shatterpoint, which is a skirmish where you have like maybe half a dozen guys. They also make Star Wars Legion, which doesn't use the same miniatures. Don't ask me why, but you're playing a larger battle with maybe 30 guys. They also make Marvel Crisis Protocol, which is kind of like Shatterpoint. Then you've got some older games like BattleTech with, they're smaller. They're a smaller scale where instead of a human being, maybe an inch and a half tall, a human would be this big, but you're not playing with humans. You're playing with big stompy robots. Yeah, Edward's got one.
I actually would say maybe this is just a New England thing. I feel like the most common by far game, if I was looking to play a war game tomorrow and it wasn't going to be a Games Workshop game, I think it would be BattleTech. I think since the pandemic, it's had a large resurgence. It's always sort of been on the back burner for a long time. The license holder changed a couple times, but I find that it's very, very cheap to get into. It could be $20 for a box, could get you an entire army's worth of guys if those are the 4 robots you wanted to actually play with. I think the downside is it's more complicated than Games Workshop. And I think this is the key that I'm going to say that why I think Games Workshop's really cornered the market, and where I'll give maybe Chris a little plug back in a minute, which is it is very easy to go onto gamesworkshop.com and say, what do I need? A combat patrol to start playing, and you buy the book. It guides you through what you need because they have created the lore and they own the whole thing. They own the walled garden, where I think a lot of other games have done I think BattleTech is guilty of this. I've done a hard time of like, what is a pickup game? Like, what models do I just bring to the store to meet someone to play with them? BattleTech doesn't have a set size to play, for example. And I think Historical Miniature Wargaming runs into that all the time. What scale are we playing? Like, most rules don't even necessarily let you just bring an army other than Bolt Action, which we talked before, which is really a tournament-based game. It's hard to just bring an army to play with someone randomly. You have to do some coordination ahead. So I will say there are people out there trying to make it more accessible for historical miniature wargaming, but I think that's a problem that the hobby is currently trying to, I would say, adapt to as we speak.
Yeah, and I think
we're seeing. Go ahead, Evan.
And I think that brings back to my earlier point is where Games Workshop really works well with its marketing, because they know I want to get people into this. We'll just make it simple. Here's the box you need. You spend $100, you're done. As opposed to, I want to get into Bolt Action. I can get this army, but I have to coordinate a lot of different things in order to make this work. And even if I buy the starter box, I don't quite have everything I need. I got to get a little bit more of this and a little more of this and a little more of this. So it doesn't quite work. And then you get into historicals. Well, I want French and Indian War. Well, great. What rules do you want? What scale do you want? What miniatures are you going to find? And then if you try to get help, then you get into the scale war that we have seen how many times in the Little Wars Discord of 28 versus 15 versus 6 versus.
You're forgetting 10. Chris is going to kill you.
I was purposely skipping 10. And then you have some weirdo that's automatically comes in when 10's just mentioned.
I heard you could skip 10.
And then somebody will go, well, why don't you do an 18? And everyone goes, who are you? And why are you talking about the scale that nobody uses? And then there's some guy that does everything in 54 millimeter for some odd reason. So there's no consistency into the historical, and that's what makes it really, really hard.
Well, I think there is, staying away from historical temporarily, because I think that's a later topic. I think Games Workshop, because they're so visible, a lot of companies are starting to copy Games Workshop's homework. And I don't say that as a bad thing, right? There are companies that are a lot better at making those starter boxes where you buy one box and it's got one starter army.Maybe it's not an army that will play the full size game, but it will play the starter size game that's maybe at half size. There is a company called Parabellum. They make a fantasy game called Conquest, Last Argument of Kings, which I think is a worse name than Middle-earth strategy battle game. But Conquest, they have fantastic starter armies. They have versions that are just one army. The rules are free online, but they also give you a printed copy. It has everything you need. It's not the full size. I think it's about 50% of the full size, but which is still a good place to start. They also sell a 2-player starter pack, so you and a friend can both get one smaller army and play against each other. Mantic, the company that makes the Halo game, which is a very small game, you only play with about 4 figures in it. And so that right off the bat, it's almost more like a board game where you have everything in the game you need to play it. But then if you want more Spartans, or if you want more Elite, or now they have whatever the guerrilla guys are called, they have those. You can buy those separately. The Brutes, thank you. It's been a while. Mantic also has a game called Kings of War, which is kind of their take on fantasy. And they literally just released a new version of Kings of War where you buy a box with an army, and that army is like a little starter army that's led by a special champion, and it's a game in a box. And you play your game in a box versus a friend's game in a box, and it all costs less than $100 each. And they're absolutely copying Games Workshop with their Combat Patrol and their I think it's called Spearhead games, where they've built this little simplified mini version. And so I think this year and in the future, we're going to see a lot more companies copying that, and it'll become easier and easier to get into the hobby that way.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Basically, as a board gamer, getting into the miniature hobby, I specifically were looking for complete. I can play the game. So for Warhammer 40K, very successful is their battle boxes that have 2 armies inside of them that are fairly well balanced. It has everything you need in it. It doesn't have the full rules or anything, but it has enough for you to play the game, put them together, and play with 2 people. Other companies do really well, like Free League Studios came out with their own miniature game called Zone Wars, and that one is everything you need in a box for a miniature game. It's a skirmish game. It's really well designed, and it's more like squad based and very much on the individual units. I think you only ever play, from the top of my head, I think I only ever play with 5 or 6 units total for the game, and it was a really good one. Little Wars TV put out a Western game. Which one was that one called again? That was complete in the box. It was a lot of fun.
that was a Tombstone Tinderbox that they put out with Ruthless.
And then a lot of other games I think are become really successful for that, like Song and Fire of Ice. The big thing that they did was their starter boxes had everything you needed to start the game with 2 players. It didn't have,
and that makes sense because Simon is a board game company that made a war game, and so they had that game in a box mentality.
And that brought a lot of people into the miniature gaming hobby because they were like, I like games of Game of Thrones. I don't want to have to think about buying all these separate things. I just want a dang game that I can play, and that's what they did. And so that got a lot of people in. And I think you're right. That's where a lot of people need to start. You need to have stuff that you can play all in one place, and then you can branch off into other things, or like the Wild Wild West with historical games where you're just like, I don't even know where to get the stuff. I can get the book, but where do I get the miniatures? Why does it sell the miniatures with the book? I'll give you money.
Well, there's a solution to that problem, but we'll get into that in a little bit too. And that's the problem that I wish Warlord Games would figure out, because like I said, they do this with a lot of their games, that here's what you need to almost do this, but you need a little bit more. And they do that with so many of their different titles just beyond bolt action, and they've got a whole laundry list. But
See,
the
that
ones
drives
that
me nuts.
don't get a lot of the fanfare, such as their Judge Dredd game, has everything you need to play it, but they don't push that title very much. They push their epic line for the Civil War, which, if you're a Civil War player, you want to do some of the big battles for the Civil War, but then you look at the contents of the box you get and you go, I can't do anything with this that would fit a lot of these battles.
Yeah.
I need to get these 4 supplements to do this.
Well, I think I want to defend Warlord Games a little bit, because the things that we praise Games Workshop for, of having both 2-player starter boxes and then also 1 army starter boxes, because not everyone wants a 2-player starter box where it's like, oh, now I have 2 armies. I don't want 2 armies. I want 1 army. So they make also the one army starter box. Warlord Games does both of those. They have 2-player starter boxes with 2 armies, I think Germans and Americans. And then they also have, the starter Soviet army, the starter German army, the starter American army. They even have like starter army winter versus non-winter. And yes, they're not the full size, but Games Workshop doesn't make a full size box either, because they do want you to buy more. And Warlord Games says, okay, you want to play Americans? Here's a paratrooper platoon of 30 guys plus a machine gun and maybe a little anti-tank gun. And do you want a tank? Okay, go buy a tank. You can play the game. Is it the full-size game? No, but I also don't even know if I would recommend most players just jump in on the full-size game. See if you like it first, dip your toes into it. And if you do like it, then you can go buy 27 tanks and have a great time.
Nobody has a great time playing bolt action with tanks, but that's a whole different subject.
Well, I think we're going to get into historic games like really quick here. So just to wrap up non-Game Workshop games, how about each of us give like an example of a non-Games Workshop game that is really good? I'm going to give 3. 2 of them are dead, but that I don't think that actually stops anything. Like, having a dead miniature games means nothing to me. It just means you don't need to worry about rule changes. Anyway, so mine is X-Wing. I think X-Wing is a really, really great miniature game. If you don't like painting miniatures, X-Wing is for you. It's all printed. Or Star Wars Armada, also dead. Or Shatterpoint, which I believe is dead now too.
It's still going.
But Shatterpoint actually also has like a 2-player set and then individual stuff too, so it does really good for that. My mind just went blank. Or the other one from Atomic Games, which is we mentioned it earlier.
Crisis Protocol.
Which one?
Marvel Crisis Protocol.
Marvel Crisis Protocol is another one that's based off the Shatterpoint system. Shatterpoint
Star Wars Legion.
Star Wars Legion, yeah. Star Wars Legion is going to be your big field of troops, where Shatterpoint is squad based and no one really dies, sort of thing. In Shatterpoint, really, you're just moving a thing back and forth, which is a lot of fun. I really like Shatterpoint. I think the system is really cool. But if you want to play like a big Star Wars game, you'll probably want to jump into that one. But those are my non-Game Workshop games that I really like, and I've played all of them but Legion. And Legion is definitely one I definitely want to play.
I think I actually have it, but I've never played it.
Do you have Legion?
I think so.
You have to put the miniatures together.
No, I haven't opened the box yet. I've had it for like 3 or 4 years.
Well, I'm gonna have to rob you. No, I'm kidding. How about you, Edward? What's a couple that you like?
I also have a lot of X-Wing and Armada in my closet over the right.
Game.
It's so fun. I really am sad. I played a lot of both. I played a lot more of Armada. It's just
it's not
to me,
like
Star Wars is the fleets shooting each other. No, it's not like it's. I mean, I'm looking for more.
It is hard to start.
Money. Yeah, like you got to go on eBay to find the ships. But the other one I'll throw out, I think it's just I'm going to say is one of the more complicated games out there, let alone that I have a tolerance for, is Infinity. I played a little bit of that too back in the day. It's also a small scale skirmish game set in, I would say, like the near future. People still have normal guns and there's some aliens. Kind of feels like Halo almost, but you're rolling all kinds of dice. everyone's reacting to each other. You're putting together a relatively complicated army list before you sit down to play. So if you really want to sink your teeth into something quite complicated, but I think tactically interesting, Infinity's out there too, from a adjacent to, I would say, 40K, but different in feeling science fiction skirmish game. But BattleTech's also the classic, as I said. If you like big stompy robots, it's kind of hard to beat BattleTech.
Quick question about BattleTech, because I was looking it up and looking at getting some of the BattleTech stuff. It actually looked like there was more than one system. Is that just
there's two?
Okay.
Yeah. So there's basically the original game from the 80s. People call that classic BattleTech today, CBT, which plays with like a big roster sheet with lots of little dots, and you're blowing arms off, and your guns are overheating, and it's a cool game. It's a little bit complicated, a little bit fiddly. It just shows its age a little, but still very fun to play. And then there's what they called Alpha Strike, which is, I want to say 5 years ago, when the new license holder purchased the IP, they said, all right, we're going to create like a starter game that uses all the same mechs, the same lore and everything, but we're just going to simplify the sheets down.
So
and people play both. You have the same miniatures. They play the same way. The critical thing about Alpha Strike is, unlike the classic game, which plays on a hex map where I'll just pick up the same model. They have hex bases, and then on the classic game, you move them on the hex map. The Alpha Strike game is played on an open table, more like a traditional miniature game where there's a tape measure, and it's more free flowing, and you're going to play with usually more robots than you would, more mechs than you would with the smaller game, because it's so much simpler to get into. A lot of classic BattleTech fans complain it's too simple, so people still play the original. It's not like it's been replaced. But yeah, there's definitely, if you're interested, maybe Alpha Strike's easier to learn, and then classic has a little bit more of that. If you care about which weapons the mechs have and whether they overheat or not, and how much armor you're blowing off, that's always an option as well.
All right, how about you, Chris?
So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to list 4, but the first one doesn't count. The first one doesn't count because you already mentioned it.
Okay.
So all of these I think are going to hit the easiest ways for players to get in, because they have 2-player starter box. They have that game in a box. So the first is going to be Star Wars Legion. Star Wars Legion has a game in a box. It's the Empire versus the Rebels, Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Stormtroopers, Rebels. I'm not a baseball fan, but Star Wars Legion's kind of in a rebuilding year right now.
It's going to 2.0, right?
Yes, but more importantly, you can't buy a lot of stuff because they're reproducing it. They're making higher quality figures than the old figures.
I saw that.
That are all going to be released this fall. So if you're watching this video in the summer of 2025, wait like 5 or 6 months and it'll all be available. So that's my first one. If you like Star Wars, I've played Star Wars Legion. It's a very fun game. It doesn't require nearly as many models as a lot of other games. 30 will probably be plenty, depending on the army you're playing. So that's my first one, but that doesn't count because you already said that. My second game in a box is going to be what I already mentioned for Mantic, and that's the Halo game. It's the fewest number of minis. You really only need 4 per player. And in fact, like board games, you move on a very interesting grid-based system where, so you never need a measuring tape. Everything is measured in squares, but there's also a lot of verticality, like you can jump up from one point to another. That's another game that I play that's fun. And it's also very interesting because it's very inspired by the video game. If you die, you respawn.
Okay.
If you kill your enemy, you can pick up the gun that they dropped. There's power-ups around there that let you go invisible and stuff. So it's a war game, and a lot of war games are trying to represent either reality, and of course that reality might be fantasy or science fiction, but if your character dies, he's dead. Halo's saying, no, Halo's a video game. We're going to make a game like a video game, except with tiny little Master Chief. And that's another very good game, and I think another great way to get in with a game in a box. And if you want to expand, great. The second one I'll mention, I've never actually played, but a friend of mine, Patrick, who a lot of us know, is a big fan of something called Cyberpunk Red Combat Zone, made by Monster Fight Club. Also has a 2-player game in a box. Again, I've never played it, but I've heard good things about it. And if you're a fan of the Cyberpunk series, that's probably going to be a good skirmish game for you, where you never really need more than 10 figures.
He's in that deep.
I can't say much more about it because I haven't played it, but I know he likes it, and I think it would meet that criteria if you like Cyberpunk, and if you like it either because the old role-playing games or because of the video game 2077. And the last one I'll mention that I forgot to mention previously, and I think a lot more people are going to be interested in this recently because of the Amazon show, is Fallout.
Yeah, I saw that
Now,
one. It looks cool.
confusingly, there are 2 Fallout games, and they're
Well,
both
only
made
2?
by well, 3 if you count the role-playing game.
Yeah. Oh, and the
I'm not
board
counting
game.
board games. I'm not counting the board games. I'm just
There's like
talking
50 of
about
them.
games that involve. Yeah. So there's Fallout Wasteland Warfare and there's Fallout Factions. I would strongly recommend Fallout Factions as a good starter miniatures game. Same thing. It's got a good game in a box. It's actually based on the Nuka World DLC for Fallout 4, where you're 2 of the Raider factions and you're fighting over Nuka World, and you play a campaign where eventually one of your factions becomes like you become the king of Nuka World. And then if you want to get further from that, you can buy a separate book that lets you play, the Brotherhood of Steel, Super Mutants, Survivors, Raiders,
Cool.
and you can expand out beyond that. I've played it once or twice. It's a great game. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun if you don't know much about Fallout. It's even more fun if you like Fallout. They also have a game called Wasteland Warfare, which is kind of like this strange hybrid role-playing game and miniature game that actually has a solo mode built in. So if you're interested in solo gaming, it's actually designed as a solo game first, where things like the super mutants follow a very simple AI system where you roll a die and it's like, oh, that super mutant got mad and it's charging at you. Or maybe if you rolled, instead of a 1, you rolled a 3, it's like, oh, that super mutant's going to dive for cover and shoot at you. So if you are someone who's looking for solo games because you don't necessarily have people around, you could try Wasteland Warfare. There is a lot of crossover between the miniatures, so if you buy one, you can then easily get the rules and try the other. So those are my 3, technically 4 picks.
It's cool. So Nathan, you hear that? You need to start assembling Star Wars miniatures, and I'll start driving.
No, I did check. It wasn't Legions that I have. It's Imperial Assault. Which is not
yeah, Imperial Assault's a much different game. That game is a campaign-based board game, also really good, but not a miniature game. Evan, what's your suggestions for non-Games Workshop games that are not historic games?
So I'm going to break the rules and I'm going to still say a historic game because it's quasi-historical. If you're coming from the Warhammer community, as much as I dislike some of the stuff that Warlord Games does, Bolt Action really is a good segue into it because it's going to be very familiar territory moving from Warhammer to Bolt Action. You're going to see like the point system, building your units in very similar ways. It's going to be very, very familiar, and there's so much research into World War II that you can use to further into that. Beyond that, one that I really like and just started getting into is Blacksite Studios, their long list of games. So they have a whole section of games. You've got Lunar, which is U.S. versus Russian. Think like the terrible James Bond movie Moonraker, where you're actually like fighting in space. So you're on the moon in space suits, like fighting cosmonauts. Really, really neat concept. You got Violent Dark, which is legally distinct aliens. Don't Look Back, which is like campy 80 horror. So all these are some really cool, interesting miniature games that are on the smaller scale where you only need 5 or 6 things. A lot of them are built as a game in the box. Like I have the Lunar starter set that I have assembled and still need to paint. I think it has 4 astronauts on each side, and that's all you have. And you can build a little bit of terrain, but you're on the moon, so how much terrain do you really need? So it's really cool concept that they've done a lot of that stuff, but they also have crunchier stuff. So as you go forward, because they're also the owner of stuff like Spectre Ops, which is a modern squad-based system that is really, really crunchy in order to do that. It was one of the systems I looked at when I was trying to find a good system for my modern stuff. It just kind of was too crunchy for me to really use as a system that I wanted. But they support their stuff really well because they also have the full line of miniatures that they do. They do STLs that you can go for on a cheaper and print your own. They also have NDF terrain, but it's also all pre-painted, which is really, really nice. So I think they're a really good not commonly talked about game systems or game company that you could look at for something.
All right. So those are some good examples of non-game workshop games. So let's get into what Evan's been revving for, the historic games and the wild, wild west of historic games. And so who wants to just get this party started? Probably Evan.
Oh no, I'm going to kick this one to Edward because I think
Okay.
Edward's been chomping at the bit to talk about this one. So
I have.
You have
This
three
is really,
historical nerds here.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. I mean, I could happily talk about historical miniature war games, once a month in perpetuity with my co-host. And I will once again plug, if you're interested in this, you should be listening to Brushes and Bayonets, because this is what we talk about all the time. But
We'll
I
put
think
that link down in the show notes for you guys.
Grow our listener numbers. We love to talk about the nuances of this side of the hobby. And, Evan and Chris and I really met, and I'll just kind of use this as a plug, through the Little Worse TV community. And I think that no one on the internet does a better job of being ambassadors to the hobby to understand what historical miniature wargaming is like than going onto YouTube and watching a Little Worse TV video. I think that they really focus on putting together a beautiful table with an interesting historical battle, and then kind of the friendship and the story that is built along the way. And I think that, really, if this is something that's interesting to you, if you've kind of been listening and you say, yeah, I like the idea of Space Marines, but like, what about, getting closer to history? I think that they're just doing such a great job to bring people in. And that's really going to be my first plug. Yes, listen to my podcast, but really listen to Little Worse TV. So from that, and kind of where this Wild West opens up is, the challenge of historical miniature wargaming is it's such a wide field. There's so many periods. There's so many scales, like we talked about earlier. There's so many rules. And most of the time, the rules do not come with the miniatures and vice versa. Really, Warlord, who Evan and Chris have mentioned, are kind of the only shop in town that's still around today, that's still popular, that are making kind of a one-stop shop for, here's like the book, and then here's the models that go with it. And, I personally view that as a positive. I played, Flames of War for a little while there, and I still have behind me a huge tray of Flames of War armies. And, I don't play the game Flames of War that much anymore today, but I still use my Flames of War miniatures all the time for lots of games, because no one could trademark World War II. It's a World War II scale game. And so people would use other miniature manufacturers in a Flames of War tournament, and I still use and buy Flames of War miniatures to use in all manner of games. So I think that maybe it's a double-edged sword. The greatest strength of historical miniature games is also in some ways its greatest weakness. And we can kind of talk about, we'll maybe think of some specific rules we really like or some manufacturers we really like. But this is where I think this side of the hobby, a little bit more research is unfortunately required outside of just watching a Little Worse TV video. I know I just said a ton, but please.
No, that's good.
Evan and Chris, jump in.
And Nathan, if you have questions at point, just jump in.
Yes, I understood everything that's been said so far.
Yeah.
So I think maybe to clarify, just, Evan talked about Warlord Games and a game called Bolt Action, and Edward talked about Flames of War. Maybe just to jump in, those are probably the two biggest companies that are the closest to doing game in a box historical. And there are some more companies that are really starting to do game in a box, but Warlord Games, which was founded by a lot of former employees of Games Workshop, probably have the largest variety of miniatures of multiple historical scales: World War II, Napoleonic, American Revolution, Civil War, ancients, Romans and things like that. A huge collection, mostly in that 28 millimeter scale, where a human is roughly 1 to 1.5 inches tall. And then they have a new smaller scale, which they call Epic. It's a very long story, where you can play larger battles with smaller figures. They do those games in a box. Their biggest flagship is Bolt Action, which is a World War II game where you probably have about 30 to 45 infantry, plus maybe a tank and a machine gun and things like that. Edward was talking about Flames of War. Flames of War is an older game, and I think it is still made. People still do play it. It's a smaller scale. It's called 15 millimeter. It's about half the size of 28 millimeter. So a human is probably about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch tall. And so the figures are smaller, which means you generally play with more of them and also more tanks. So instead of playing 45 soldiers, you're playing 100 soldiers and 10 tanks. So it's meant to represent larger battles. And those are, I find, are sold in a lot of miniature stores, and you can find people, not in every miniature store, but in enough of them, that if you're interested in World War II, those are probably your two easiest ways into the hobby, depending on if you want to do like a smaller number of big figures or a bigger number of small figures.
Another one I was thinking about was Firelock Games, I think it was, that made Oak and Iron. I think that was it. And then that has a really nice starter set to it.
Yeah. Oak and Iron is a pirate sailing ship game, but I think their main one is Blood and Plunder.
Oh, I really want to play Blood and Plunder. And they do have like a 2-player set.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That
If
thing's
you like
huge.
pirates, look up Blood and Plunder. It's 28 millimeter, a golden age of pirates. You can get like a sailboat that's this big, and you could play a game where your guys run around the sailboat and you sail around and shoot cannons at each other.
The one Evan has is even bigger than that, isn't it?
Yeah. They have a big giant set that's got 2 ships in it and a thing, but the downside is like $200. But you get a lot of content in that.
But they have a perfect game in a box where you get, I forget exactly how many miniatures in it, but I think for roughly $100, maybe a little bit more, you get some sailors, some pirates, some captains, and one ship, and you can go toe to toe, swashbuckling and swinging off the poop deck and pirate things.
In context, that's like one miniature, $100+ for Games Workshop.
Yes. Well, yeah.
I want to throw a little clarity into this for people that are watching this, because if you're coming into this and you're watching this, a lot of times you're not going to have a lot of miniature context. So when we're talking scale, when we're talking like 32 millimeter, 28 millimeter, usually what that means is, Chris talked about how big it was, but that also represent one guy per figure. And straight up, when we're going down into scale and we're talking about Battlefront Miniatures, which does Flames of War, they've done Team Yankee. I can't even remember what their Vietnam one is. I think it's just called Nam, which they just re-released. You're putting 4 or 5 miniatures onto a base. So now that base of 15 millimeter is representing a company or a battalion, depending on the conflict that you're trying to do. So by going smaller, you're in essence going bigger because you're putting more on a base. Also with 28 millimeter, you're usually like on a 28 millimeter base or or something like that. 15 millimeter usually has a rectangular base. Flames of War uses like a proprietary base that has slots that you put your guys onto, but they're typically using these rectangular style bases to represent these companies. So by going smaller, you're actually going bigger, which is a kind of a weird concept if you really think about it, but it's really cool.
So does that mean with the larger scale, you tend to be more on like individual skirmishes, where the smaller scale, you're on full-fledged, the whole battle?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. If you watch Band of Brothers and you're like, I want to do Band of Brothers, right? Where it's a small group of people and we're more looking at individuals and it's mostly infantry, probably not a lot of vehicles, maybe one. That's the kind of thing that does very well with 28 millimeter, right? Where the big figures are bigger. You probably have 30 to 45 of them. You're putting, on the hobby side, you're probably putting a little bit more detail into the painting end. And maybe even depending on the game, there's more room for like narrative play, because that is your sergeant and you're putting, your story into him. Whereas games like Flames of War, where you have the smaller figures and you have a couple of guys on a base that's maybe, 2 inches wide and 1 inch deep, that whole base might represent a squad. So it's less about the individual and it's more about the larger battle. And some people like the little tiny skirmishes and some people like those larger battles, and it's just an area of personal preference.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to think about it, like Chris was saying, if you want to just do the squad, you're going to do 28 millimeter individual. If you want to do the from Band of Brothers, if you want to do Foy, you probably want to do 15 millimeter, that kind of scaling. If you want to do D-Day Invasion, you probably want to do 10 or 6 millimeter just to make it fit. And by like D-Day, I mean like all of D-Day.
Which is a Little Worse TV video.
It's true.
And Foy is too, twice. In 28 and in 15 millimeter.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions with historic games is, um, it seems like a hobby that's near impossible for someone to jump into and just get things and play. So there's just a plethora of different rule systems you can use. There's a plethora of different miniatures you can pick up. You also have to think about your terrain versus what the miniature size they're going to be using and all that fun stuff. And there's like you said, there's some ways that you can get into it with getting like box sets and stuff, but the large majority of it does not have that. So if people are watching and they're like, wow, I really like historic games and I really want to get into historic miniatures, what would your suggestion to get them like started in this area, specifically with things they want to do that don't necessarily have one system out there or one thing? How are they ever going to figure out what to get and then try to get other people to play?
So if I may, I think the most important question, the same way when we start with Games Workshop, you want to ask, well, do you like science fiction or fantasy? Because that's going to point you in one of two directions. Or a better question, do you like Lord of the Rings? Go play Lord of the Rings is better. But with historicals, we say historical. Well, what history do you like? Some people are really into the American Civil War. It's one of the most popular historical eras. I personally don't get it. I just don't. I don't know why. I guess when I was there's a meme out there where like when you turn 30, every man is randomly assigned a war that they suddenly get very interested in. I was not assigned the Civil War.
What were you assigned, Chris?
Everything except the Civil War.
Like literally anything.
Actually, it's World War I, but so like what history are you into? Is it the Civil War? Is it World War II? Is it World War I? Is it Vietnam? Not a lot of people, but some people. Is it ancient history? Is it medieval history? Is it the Warring Kingdoms era of Chinese history? Right?
Okay.
Whatever it is, that's what you want to look into. After that, if you picked a really popular era like World War II, congratulations, you have dozens of choices, and some of them, like we mentioned, Flames of War, Bolt Action, are game in a box. If you picked Chinese Warring States period, I have some bad news for you. You'll find it, but it's going to be a harder path. I'm going to do this once. I promised Devin. I'm contractually obligated to make a plug at this point. But as I mentioned, and as everyone, a lot of people here have mentioned, we all met through the Little Wars TV community. Well, I got so involved in the Little Wars TV community, I co-founded a company with two members of Little Wars TV, Greg Wagman and Miles Reedy, called BattleBox Studios. And we're a small independent rules publisher. And one of our primary goals is to help people get interested and get into not just the miniatures hobby, but the historical miniatures hobby, because that's what we're passionate about. And so one of the things we're doing as a company, we're only a couple months old, is we want to start creating these game in a box systems that are you going to find at your local Target? Maybe one day, but I hope.
You've made it then, actually. Like that's the goal.
Oh yeah, yeah. I won't be on this podcast. I'll be, sipping Mai Tai somewhere.
Yeah,
but
with your monocle and your golden cane, you'd be like, I did it.
Yeah, but in the somewhat near future, we want to release some of these games in a box, and we're starting and working on right now, and hopefully it will be available later in 2025. A ancient system called Age of Hannibal, which already exists. It's a fairly popular game for playing ancient battles, and this one was based around Caesar's invasion of Gaul, and it will come with the little Roman legionaries and the little Gallic warriors that you need to play. And these will be in 6mm, which is a smaller scale, very, very small. Actually, surprisingly easy to paint because they're small. They don't have a lot of detail, but that lets you play these really big battles. Thank you, Edward. So you could do Caesar's invasion of Gaul, and you're not going to play with 28mm figures because you need a tennis court to play the battle. You're going to play with smaller figures. You can play on your dining room table, and you can do Caesar's invasion of Gaul, not in one battle, of course, but over a campaign that we're writing for that. And we have some other things in mind for the future, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself.
So, BattleBox, you already have. Are you already up? Like, can they purchase things
Yes,
from you now?
we are up. We have a number of rules out, most of which were written by one of our founders, Greg Wagman. He is Age of Hannibal is an Ancients rule set. He has a game called Altar of Freedom, which is a War rule set, which I believe those were some of the figures Edward was holding up for Civil War.
It's true. They're Civil War and they're based for Altar Freedom, which I was
Altar
gonna plug at some point. So yeah.
Our very first product, which was released about a month or two ago, is called When Dreadnoughts Ruled the Seas. And it is, there's actually two slightly different versions of it by Brian DeWitt about the age of big gun battleships in the early 20th century. One for World War I, and one of them for actually the Russo-Japanese War, which is the obsession when strange wars were being handed out. My partner Miles Reedy was handed that one. And actually, we just got the World War I set of those rules on Amazon and is available as a physical book. No, unfortunately, World War I ships will not come with that book on Amazon. You can find them out there. They're a little hard to find, but again, that's one of our goals, is to get that into a box so people can play like that.
I'm specifically interested in that. I love ship battles.
Yeah, they just put a couple of videos out for playing through that too. So fantastic videos, Little Wars, to kind of check out what it is and what it's about.
And naval battles are a great way to get started because you paint maybe 10 ships and you need a blue piece of cloth.
Well, I mean, unless your ocean's dirty.
You need a brown-ish blue piece of cloth. You don't need hills and bridges and trees. It's the ocean. There's not much there. If you want to get fancy, you can buy a mat that looks like the ocean's got little waves on it, but it's a very low barrier to entry.
Yeah. Plus, it's cool. It's cool maneuvering those ships and firing and all that.
Battleships are cool.
I love like just Ironside games and stuff like that. I just love ship battle games, whether it be sail, steam, or giant guns. But yeah, that's really cool. So we're gonna see more stuff coming out for you guys for that. So you have three rule sets available right now.
That's a great question. Let me go to our website so I don't forget anything. We have Age of Hannibal. We have Altar of Freedom. Oh, I forgot. We have Live Free or Die, which is an American Revolution.
That's an older one,
rule
right?
set.
That's
it's a couple years old.
Yeah.
We have When Dreadnoughts Ruled the Sea, and then actually we have two rule sets that are completely 100% free for anybody to download. One of them is called Ruthless. You actually mentioned the Tombstone.
I got to play that one. That's good.
Yes, that is a free rule set written by Mark Festoso and Brian DeWitt. Brian DeWitt also wrote the World War I naval rules. That's a great one if you like westerns. If you like Magnificent Seven or any of those movies, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I'm not a western person. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Thank you. That's a great, totally free rule set. Very quick. It fits on one piece of paper, both sides. And then we have another free rule set called Raven Feast, which is, Vikings raiding England and things like that. Completely free. And actually that PDF within Raven Feast, there you go. It has guides to how to get into miniatures gaming, including painting guides, how to build a Viking longhouse, because that was Little Wars TV trying to give back to the community and create a free rule set.
Cutouts for the miniatures.
I was going to say, you could do
and it's little paper miniatures for free. So that is possibly the lowest barrier to entry there is.
If I can make a suggestion, make a box set for that with printed bound rules, and I'll be all over that.
I'll take it to the committee.
Because I'm all fine and good with this. This is great. And it's 28 millimeter, I believe. At least that's what
you could do it with any size, but 28 is kind of the preferred.
Guess what size Blood Rage is? 28 millimeters.
Oh yes, that is 28 millimeters.
So
I can tell you they used to have physical books. They ran out, but we'll hopefully have physical books in the future as well.
Yeah. Least historic miniatures ever. I have those for it.
James, I think I have an extra physical copy. I'll look through my stuff, but
oh yeah, definitely. So PDFs and free prints are fine for me, but I'm not young. and I like having a book. It's just a deficiency I have. I'm not going to not stop me from playing that game, but I will say this is wonderful. If you want to get into miniature games, this game is one-page rules is significantly harder to learn by a large amount than this. You can read this and get into a game in like, I think the rule video they have online there is like 7 minutes long. 7 minutes. And you can be playing this game. It's just amazing. And it does have everything. I mean, you can cut them out and put paper miniatures up and you can play. And it does have advanced rules in the back there. So if you want to play with your Frost Giant, like that I literally have. Because I don't know if they saw Blood Rage and are like, I want to play with a Frost Giant. Well, I want to play with a Frost Giant. And they have rules in the back. I just think that Little Wars TV hit it out of the park with this. They really,
and I think
did a great job.
Thank you. I'll shout out 2 more companies and then I'll pass it on back to Edward and Evan. If you like Vikings, there's a company called Victrix. They make high quality plastic figures, Vikings, along with a lot of other stuff. And they have a brand new game that is so brand new, I'm not even sure if it's actually physically available yet or if it's like next week. It'll be out by the time you see this video, called Pillage. And they will also have starter sets, right? It's not quite game in a box. They don't have like 2 armies in one box, but they have a Viking set. They have an Anglo-Saxon set. They have a Norman set. And I think they also have a Rus, the Russian Vikings set. And it's a little bigger than Raven Feast. It's about 30 figures, whereas Raven Feast is more like 10, maybe 12. But obviously you could use the same figures to play both games. And then there's another company that's really exploded in the historicals scenario, and they also make fantasy and sci-fi, but they're called War Games Atlantic, and they actually produce miniatures right here in the United States in Rhode Island. And they, along with another company called Footsore Miniatures, produced a game called The Barons' War, which is about a conflict in England, I think in the 12th century. But to be perfectly honest, it's a good medieval figures set of rules that have a lot of really high quality plastic figures, which also means plastic. We haven't really talked about the miniature side too much, but plastic tends to be cheaper than metal. Metal a little more expensive and also a little harder to put together. But it was so popular, they had to stop selling it so that they could ship out all the ones that they already sold. And they're going to put it back on sale once they've worked through all of that. So if you like medieval stuff, that's a game and a set of miniatures that's very widely available here in the US, also around the world through other distributors as well.
Yeah, I love that time frame. That's like my Achilles heel for all that stuff. I really love the Anglo-Saxon story book set by Bernard Cornwell. So
I have a lot of those somewhere back there.
Yeah, and one of my favorite games.
They did the show, The Last Kingdom.
Yeah, The Last Kingdom is actually one of my favorite games ever because it's perfect for that setting. Also, I believe when Evan ran Raven Feast, we had some of the characters in it.
And then that sounds like that very first question I said. It's like, well, what's the historical period? It sounds like for you, James, it sounds like the answer is like Vikings and Anglo-Saxons and maybe the Norman invasion of England. And then I would say to you, well, then obviously Raven Feast. Yeah, Raven Feast is free. And then also maybe try Victrix's new Pillage game. And even if you don't like those rules, their miniatures are great for Raven Feast. And there's other games out there for you as well.
And Victrix, their miniatures are top notch. They're clean sculpted. They're easily to assemble. Their spears are fiddly, but I think that's 90% of companies' spears are fiddly just because it's halved, and when you're 28 millimeter, it can't be really that sturdy. But separate subject.
Nathan, what's your? Sorry, Evan.
No, that's
droopy spears.
Nathan, what's your like historical point of interest?
Well, you mentioned something that kind of blew my mind, and I've been trying to wrap my head around it. It's like you mentioned there's miniature games for the Warring State period, which, if I'm not mistaken, those armies were usually in the hundreds of thousands. And I don't know how you would do that in miniatures.
Well, they're usually tiny miniatures. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm not an expert in Chinese history. I don't even want to say I'm an amateur in Chinese history. I'm nothing in Chinese history. But I know the Warring States period exists. I know miniatures exist. They're actually made by a company called Micro World Games here in the great state of New Jersey. And while I don't know of any rules for them, if that was something you were interested in, I'm sure we could find something for it.
Yeah. Also, just to jump in, because I think that this is something we've sort of talked a little bit about, but I think is worth getting into, and something that, especially when people are new to historicals compared to, Warhammer or other science fiction adjacent games, it's worth talking about. When people are kind of sitting down to think about historical miniature games, it's coming from a little bit of a different tradition than, Warhammer 40K, which really has roots in kind of the outgrowth of a classic RPG like Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s. A lot of war games are kind of originating from, to get very nerdy on us, almost 200 years ago when the Prussians created these staff exercises for training. And what they were thinking about was kind of like what Evan was saying earlier. They had little markers to represent units, but how many men? So I'm going to use this little base that I have an example. It's unpainted. Please forgive me. They're currently on deck to be painted. But on my little base of miniatures, I have, I would say, about 20 American Civil War soldiers in their garb. But the important thing to know is, on the table, when I want to be playing the Battle of Gettysburg or the Battle of Antietam, they will be representing a large number of men. They will be representing 2,000 men. So in some ways, the miniatures are an abstract representation of what you're trying to portray on the table. And a lot of that are not skirmish-sized historical miniature games have some level of abstraction. So I think that, to your point of like, how do you get 100,000 men on the table? You don't really get 100,000 men on, but we're painting the miniatures that are representing. And some older rule sets say every man on the base is 20 men. Most rule sets have gone away from that. You can kind of base them however you want. And I'll use this opportunity to say, James, you asked earlier, it seems complicated to get into historical games. How does it work? How do you pick the right scale? How do you pick? Here's what I'm going to say. Here's the secret. It does not matter. You choose the miniatures you like and you base them the way that you want. And most rules that people play, you can adapt them how you want. I think so often new people will come on the Little Wars TV Discord, or I'll see stuff on Reddit and someone's like, how wide should I base? Like, should I buy 30 centimeter bases or 40 centimeter bases? And the answer truly is, people, I get why you're overthinking it, because there's a set standard in Warhammer. You have to base your Space Marines on this size base. You have to base your orcs on this size base. It is not the same way in historical miniature games. Rules writers are creating this amount of leeway because people have aesthetic preferences, because people have older collections, because, they bought the miniatures for Flames of War, but they're playing something else now. What I'm just going to say is, if it's interesting to you, we could definitely talk about some, manufacturers that we like, and plastic versus metal later. But I really want to reinforce, you're not locked into anything. It's you could just jump in and it will be fine. Trust me.
As long as it's uniformed across the board, you're good.
Yeah.
And I think that's one area. I think that's one area where people who start with Warhammer and then move into historicals have trouble with that jump, because they're used to, there are rules I have to follow about how big the guys are and with the size of the base and the shape of the base. And I think people who come from board games might actually have more of an advantage there, because if you're used to playing some board games that are war board games, either Hex Encounter or maybe the Command and Colors games, you're like, okay, yeah, this counter represents a platoon. The end, right? It represents a platoon in the same way that we would say, okay, I got a square. It's a 1-inch square. It's got a couple of little guys on it. It's a platoon. Are there 30 men on there? No, it's abstract.
Yeah, one thing I'll throw out there, which I used at a smaller scale, but I think in a larger scale, like I'm still trying to eventually get out to a miniatures convention or create my own miniature convention with our group. I think miniature conventions would be a great place for people to go to try out these different systems and see what's there, and then get that jump into the hobby. Like they'll go and they'll play whatever game they're interested in, and they can learn about the rule set that was used, the miniature scaling, and they can sort of get that like baby step in, because they'll just follow whatever scale that person's using, because who cares, and get the book and get moving on that too. So I think, and most conventions are not that expensive, so for what you get.
So yeah, and that's the point I was going to really make is one of the dark sides to our hobby is the amount of rule books we have for different wars.
Now I'm just seeing a guy with
It
a trench
is
coat like, "You need a rule book."
ridiculous. For Black Powder period, I have so many rule books, and a lot of them I've never played. I got them off recommendations, read through them, not for me. I still have them. The hardest part is trying to find the rules that you want to use. And a lot of times the best way to do that, and I'm going to say it and I'll say it 100 times doing all this stuff, is make it to an HMGS convention if you're interested in historical miniatures. Take your period that you're interested in, find a game based around that, and give it a try. Because at that point, you're going to actually physically play it, because it's hard to walk into a gaming shop, into a miniature shop and say, I want to play World War One. And people are going to look at you, well, what era of World War One? What scale? And you're going to be like, I don't know. If you're going to Google, I need miniature rules for World War II, you are going to be inundated with probably 500 different rule sets. Instead of trying to sort through them and try to figure it out, watching review videos and play videos, start sampling them. Actually go to a convention, sit down for 3 to 4 hours, play those games, and see if that's what you like.
Yeah.
You're going to spend a weekend playing a ton of games, meeting a lot of cool people. If you're in, the ones in Pennsylvania, you're going to see Chris and myself definitely there floating around playing games. And we can give you recommendations there. You will meet a lot of the Little Wars TV guys, and they're probably the most approachable people in the whole world. And they will sit and talk to you about games. Most of the GMs there are the same way. If you find someone that's interested in Rev War, they will love to talk to you about Rev War stuff for hours, much like any of us talk about our wars of passion that we have. We will guide you in a way because we have the experience and, we've done the research. We can point you in directions. So go to these conventions. They're not really that expensive. You're going to spend a good weekend playing games, having a lot of fun. The other way I would recommend, and it's for people such as myself, I don't have a lot of historical miniature gamers around me. So that's another problem. You can't really play by yourself. You need somebody to play with. So one of the ways that I'm able to play some of these games, and it's not a true miniature way, but with the video that we had, I think in our release cycle would be last week or the week before, where we talked with James from the IKS, is getting into online games such as Kriegspiel and stuff like that, where you're actually able to play a lot of campaigns or battles for different periods that you would be interested in, and you're going to be playing with people around the world, and you'll be actually able to play. So it's another nice way that you could actually do stuff like that. We actually have a couple going through that were generated in the Little Wars TV Discord we've gone through, and we've actually used some of the Ultra Freedom rules. We actually play them on Tabletop Simulator. We've done Live Free or Die. We have another one coming soon. It's going to be a lot of fun. If Edward would actually just surrender Creed, we'd get along quicker, but he's very stubborn. So
no, you don't understand. The British Navy is coming, and will slowly evacuate us for the win. So
just quickly, Evan mentioned
combat right now, but go for it, Chris.
Evan mentioned HMGS. That's the Historical Miniatures Gaming Society. And the main branch is mostly located in the Mid-Atlantic, in Pennsylvania, occasionally outside of Pennsylvania.
The perfect
There
state.
are other branches. There's one in the Midwest that I think has a convention in Chicago. There are miniature games at some of the bigger conventions like Adepticon, maybe Gen Con. I'm not sure if Gen Con has miniatures.
I don't know.
And there's some out in California. The best thing to do is probably just Google Historical Miniatures Convention and your state or a nearby state, and you'll probably find something going on.
And it looks like there's a lot of other games other than historic games that are played there too. So like there is Warhammer and some fantasy games. So you can also jump into those too, probably. But one thing I just wanted to swing back is you explained the acronym, which is one thing. But the other thing is, which is really important, why Kriegspiel actually even works online at all. So do you want to get into a little bit of just briefly of how Kriegspiel can work on Discord?
So Discord is like the perfect vessel for playing Kriegspiel, for the fact of Kriegspiel is played in a double blind system where you play as a player in command of troops. You're in an area and you should know what's going on in a different area. You should know what's happening in your area and that area only. So by setting different roles in rules in the Discord, you have permissions to see certain things or not certain things. And the umpires and the GMs can set that up for both sides. And now as you play, they're disseminating maps to you and information to you, dispatches to you that only you can see and is only your information. So now you can run through an entire battle, campaign, whatever it may be, where you're truly in the pilot seat of that person, of that unit, or that battalion, corps, whatever it may be, in whatever scale. Because I've played Kriegspiels down to first person view of a 3-tank Russian anti-tank squad, and I've gone all the way to corps commander. So and everything in between. So I only have the information of what I should have the information, which is a big branch off from playing like these large war games on a board game, where if I'm commanding these guys over here on the right flank, I should have no idea what's happening over on the left flank because that's 30 miles away. I can't see that. I don't have any information of that. But if I just turn my head slightly to the left, I can see it. So it really takes a lot of that out. And that's why Discord really works well for that.
Yeah, I thought that was important to throw out there because it's a unique way of doing it. And a lot of people maybe not have the luxury of having anywhere that they can play locally. And that is an option. And it gives a really cool fog of war and more realistic in that manner for your warfare.
Well, and to get the point, most of us here, minus Edward, played Lord of the Rings one. James is 20 minutes away from me, but Chris has stated that he's in the wonderful state of New Jersey, and we all played in the same game. And right now, in a different Discord game, Edward and I are playing, fighting the Battle of Crete. He's in New England, and we're doing this distance
and
means
my
nothing.
Australian commander is actually Australian, and
he's playing upside
at midnight. He'll put his orders in, and I'll look at the next day and see what he's up to, and I get his orders in. And it's great to listen to his radio message with his accent. But yeah, no, it's definitely, I think I've met people all over the world in this hobby, which I think is awesome.
As with many extremely niche hobbies, like the internet has been just such a wonderful thing. And the more obscure your hobby is, the better the internet has been. Especially, going all the way back to the beginning of this video, you want to play Warhammer? Easy, right? It's everywhere. You want to play historicals, depending on what historical you're playing, it's gonna be a lot harder to find. And going on the internet will not only let you find like-minded people who'll be happy to talk to you about it and play online with it, but also eventually, hopefully, find an in-person community that you can also play with once a week, once a month, maybe only a couple of times a year. But the internet and the TGG has a miniatures page on their Discord. Obviously, we've talked repeatedly about the Little Wars TV Discord. There's another YouTube channel I'm going to shout out called Mark's Game Room, which has a Discord that they just started up. And so these different historical focused Discords that we don't just talk about historical. We have a subsection where we talk about fantasy and science fiction and Lord of the Rings. And, we have a great time talking, and we see each other, a couple times a year. And some of us have friends who live in the area and some of us don't.
Now, one thing I'll say real quick is I'm going to try to gather all these links, and I'll keep them in the description. So as I forget to add them in there and time goes by and you see this video and you're like, where the heck's the link for this? I will add it. So I'll mainly rely on Evan to start gathering these, and we'll have them in there so to help out. But yeah, so one thing for historic games, and then we can jump into just open, but if you had a system that you'd recommend, we'll each just go through and we have one system for someone getting into and they recommend. Obviously, I like Raven Feast, so that's mine. It's wonderful. You might want a little more afterwards, like so, but that's the point. It gets you in there. It has the base rules to play, and then maybe you'll graduate to more complex systems after that. But it's a really good starting point, and it's like, and you can keep going back to it because there'll be tons of people that may want to play that game with you, or a game in that era, and you'll be like, okay, well, let's play with this system because I can teach you in 5 minutes, and we can play, and then you can move on. But yeah, Raven Feast, amazing. How about you, Edward?
This is a Sophie's choice.
Only one. No, get it.
I'll go with one. It might surprise Evan and Chris, but I'm going to go with one. I think a very popular period that people like to play in historicals is, of course, World War II, as you can imagine. But another very popular one is the Napoleonic Wars. And I think a reason for that is the uniforms look very spiff and spam. Yeah. There's a lot of really big personalities. And it has a lot of interesting tactical interplay where the guys are marching in a column, or they're in a line, or they form a square to repel against cavalry. And I found that the most accessible game that I can pick up and play to just play a whole battle is a game called Snappy Nappy. It's got a fun name, a little bit silly. Snappy Nappy, for playing quick games. And it's really designed for playing with a lot of people and getting, miniatures on the table and kind of capturing the flavor, the essence, if you will, of the period without getting too bogged down in rules. And, as I said before, in the book, they have a recommendation of how big to make your bases, but you could always change that scaling. You could always move it around. And I think it's just an easy one to get in and say, I've never played a Napoleonic game before. I've never even maybe played a historical game before. I just think the rule book does a really good job kind of walking you through, here's the steps of getting started. It kind of gives you a little bit about putting terrain together, a little bit about how to think about your miniatures, a little bit about how you would play, a multiplayer game with more than 2 people. And I think the book itself does a good job. And even though it doesn't include, miniatures in a box, because of course you could buy miniatures of any size, you can play Napoleonics. You can have 3-inch bases with 4 28mm guys on it to be a unit, or you can have, a 1-inch base that has 12 6mm guys on it. So you can, as I said, you're kind of spoiled for choice, which can get confusing, but I think the book does a good job kind of orienting you on what some of those potential options are within the Napoleonic Wars. So that'll be my one choice. If I could pick many more, we would be here for too long. So I'll stick with one and see where Evan and Chris go with it.
How about you, Chris?
So I think this game has gotten mentioned before, and not to be too hard on Edward and Evan, but I think they kind of ragged on it a little bit. I'm going to say Bolt Action, and I'm going to say it for a very specific reason. Number one, if you want to play with people in person, Bolt Action is probably the historical game that you have the best chance of finding in a gaming store near you, and there are going to be people who play it near you. It's very friendly to people starting with Games Workshop, Warhammer games to get into. And while it's certainly, no one's ever going to argue that Bolt Action is a extremely historically accurate, very, like you're really playing exactly what World War II was like. But I don't think the authors of Bolt Action would say that's what they were going for. They were going for, this is a fun game that's kind of like Hollywood World War II. It's like Band of Brothers, or it's like Saving Private Ryan. That's what they were going for, I think. And it's available and it's inexpensive. They hit that, game in a box thing very well, I think. They also have, once you want to expand, you're like, I have the game in a box. I split it with a friend. He got the Germans. I got the Americans. I want some more. Well, you buy the German box and I buy the American box. And now we're pretty much set. And if we want to buy more stuff, we can. And I think that's why I'd say Bolt Action. Also, who doesn't like World War II? Everybody likes World War II. So I think that's what I would recommend. And if you don't like World War II, so many other games out there, but that would be my recommendation.
Just to jump on that too, because I think this is an important thing to think about if you're coming from the board game world, is let's say you buy the Bolt Action box and you play Bolt Action. I know I said this before a little bit, but really bears repeating. If you're not liking the Bolt Action rules, or if you like them but want something different, you can use the same miniatures. It's all the same thing. Like you could play another game that's similar scale as Chain of Command. People have Chain of Command armies that they play in Bolt Action one weekend and Chain of Command the next weekend. You're truly, in some ways, this is the downfall. Like I said, it's complicated, but if you find an entry point and you find a period, like Chris said, you're interested in, you can always pivot. And that's not something really available in the Games Workshop world, nor in like a Marvel Crisis Protocol world that is an advantage of historicals. it does make it more complicated, but your investment, I think, pays off in a so much wider way when you can use your miniatures for so many different rules.
And to kind of
Absolutely.
pile onto that point, as I've ragged on bolt action, for different reasons, so it really is a good entry level system. I play bolt action with 15 millimeter miniatures. They're repurposed Flames of War miniatures on singular basis. I change nothing, absolutely nothing about the bolt action rules other than instead of 28 millimeter, I'm playing with 15 millimeter. The sole reason I did that is the 28 millimeter miniatures are stinking expensive. I can buy a box of Battlefront Flames of War World War II American for like $30, and I get 120 Americans in that. For that $30, I'm getting 4 28 millimeter guys, and that's the whole thing. I can get probably 4 buildings for the same price as Warlord charges for one of their buildings, and other than that, I don't have to change anything, and the scaling works perfectly fine. Ranges work, everything works. So repurposing, absolutely 100%.
I will just jump in. Is bolt action in the 28 millimeter more expensive than Flames of War per figure? Yes, they are bigger figures, but you can hop on Amazon and you can get a box of 30 American troops for $45, and you might be able to get them less expensive elsewhere. And honestly, 30 American troops you're like most of the way there.
Now, I cheated for a lot of mine, and the fact that I would go on eBay and find somebody getting out of Flames of War and selling their collection on the dirt cheap, and then I just pop them off the bases and put them on my own. Now I don't have to pay.
Evan, that's a different video.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely,
a totally different video.
It's but I digress. So rule set for me, the one that I'm personally really liking is Force on Force. So 28 millimeter, mostly set in modern, but you can actually play it for anything World War II to ultra modern. For some people, it's kind of off-putting that you get the rule book and it's like 400 some pages. You need 20 that to play the game, and it's boiled down to that. And then how much extras do you want? Do I want vehicles? Well, then add in these 4 pages. Do I want to add, and so on and so forth. And then if you want to get into uber specific eras, they have extra books for that. That's kind of where I'm at right now with my stuff, because some of the modern stuff has kind of taken my fancy right now. So I've been there, done that. And I searched for a long time trying to find the right rule set. Went to, I can't remember which HMGS convention was, played Force on Force there, and it was like, yep, right here, this is it, this is the one that I've been looking for. So to circle back to that point too, definitely try them at a convention. It's probably the best way to experience them and find the ones you want. I'll also cheat and say, if you don't have a lot of people around you, the Kriegspiel system, definitely another way to go, because guess what, you don't have to learn a lot of rules. The umpires do it mostly for you.
So that Force on Force, I think, is the one we played, and that was pretty amazing. I rolled so well along with the other person I was playing with that our people had T-shirts, and we were eliminating all the armored troops everywhere.
Fives and sixes, uncanny. It was unbelievable rules. If I was not there to actually witness it, I would not believe it.
Yeah, like literally, we had to roll like, I don't know. Let's say you have to roll a 6 on a 6-sided die. I'd roll like 5 of them, and we would just wipe everyone out. And I had a guy with the T-shirt and shorts, just eliminating everyone. It was.
Some people would say that's beginner's luck. Other people would say it's always polite that if you're teaching someone brand new to the hobby a game, you always let them win, because then they want to come back and play again.
Well, that's true too, but this was just wrong. Like, it was bad because they even swapped dice with us, and it was still like both of us, the two of us, just could not roll wrong. We got every save, we got every hit. Used different dice.
It was bad.
It was bad. Like, we didn't even. They were supposed to plow through us to get, I think, what was it, Russians to show up?
Yeah.
They could not get past us. Everybody died.
I mean, the times the dice go crazy are the ones that you remember. So
I know, it was amazing.
The dice tell their stories.
Like, I have stories of my guy just jumping out and be like, bah, bah, bah. It's like 10 people around him. He should have been like dead. But instead, they're shooting in the air.
Magic short shorts on that guy.
Yeah. I mean, really, in the end, a lot of our points boiled down. And it was a point that, well, it was on your podcast, Edward, that I made. If you're interested in doing this, just do it. Just don't be afraid to jump in, get involved in the community, and ask questions. There is something out there for you. It's just a matter of finding it. And if you need a little guidance to get there, by absolute means, there's going to be people like us that are there that know, and we're going to find it for you. So if you like World War II, we can point you in a direction of what you want to do. If you like the Anglo-Zanzibar War, there's somebody out there that's just like you, and we will do our damnedest to find them so you can play that to your heart's content.
Is that the one that lasted 1 hour?
I was going to say, isn't that like the 2-minute war? Like, what are you really doing with that one?
Yes, it had one casualty. The British had one casualty, and that was it.
Hey, they made one for the Emu Wars, and literally that was just guys with machine guns just trying to kill emus and failing epically.
Yeah, that's a fun box. That's a fun bag of miniatures there. But
yeah, that was pretty cool. So we could talk on, and I actually want to do more of these because I'm really interested in getting into the hobby, especially as time goes by and get more games in, and I paint till my fingers fall off my hands.
That's where you get somebody like Chris who paints for you.
Yeah, I do like painting though, but I'm what you would call mediocre. But I want to be an expert, so I paint mediocrely, but I want my thing to be perfect, so I just paint it forever. So I just
and that's part of the hobby. Right,
yeah.
We've talked about the gaming side of the hobby. The painting side of the hobby is a whole other world, and it's just as much a part of it.
Yeah, and you honestly don't, like, if you want to just play the game and you don't paint, I'll play the game. I don't care. I play board games like nothing's ever painted. It's just a wall of gray.
As cars that drive around in my area, primer is a color.
Primer is color. But I do paint, like I painted all the side, and I do enjoy painting my board games. However, I don't think that should be a barrier to playing the game. But I do really enjoy painting, and there's a lot of stuff out there for that. You can get down rabbit holes of like which paints, but who cares? Just paint stuff. You'll get there. I just got into doing the highlighting with the zenithal highlighting and all that fun stuff. You just keep going, like, and you know, if you use acrylic paints and you really are anal like me, and you could always put it a dip in that LA Finest and go at it again. Doesn't matter. Or you could pay Chris to paint.
No, I'm too busy. No more.
No more. So I'll put his link in the show notes. Please.
How else can he afford to have, Google turning off his lights behind him?
Yeah. So yeah, I would love to have you guys on again sometime and go over some more stuff. This was a lot of fun. Did anyone want to throw anything out before we wrap this up?
No, I snuck my plug in the middle, so I'm all set. I appreciate you guys having me on. It was a pleasure.
And we're going to try to get, try to have all those links down in the show notes. And if I forget some, I'll just add them in as time goes by. But thank you again, both, for showing up here and going over miniature games for us. But out to all you out there, if you like what we do, please just like and subscribe. It just helps us out, helps us get more videos out to you all and all that fun stuff. But I hope that this was informative. This gets you maybe or sparks you into a new hobby and a whole world of really cool stuff. And I know I'm really excited to get into it and get more stuff outside of Games Workshop. So we'll see how that goes. But for all
Nathan quietly has been adding to cart a bunch of ancient
I hope so.
Chinese armies and
I did do a little Googling, but no, I did not add anything to cart.
So hopefully we can get Nathan into this too. But for now, You all have a great night, and thank you for watching.